Welcome to the Ascent podcast, a show about inspiring people who explain their path to achievement. I'm your host, Joe Burgess, Wealth Advisor at Moxie Wealth Management. This month's episode features a return of Joe Cavanaugh, founder and CEO of Youth Frontiers. I'm a big fan of Joe and the work his organization does, focusing on teaching character and leadership. His organization has developed a variety of programs intended for different audiences, including high schoolers, business leaders, teachers, and most recently, parents. In this episode, we discuss character and mental health issues prevalent in kids today. And as you'll hear, Joe will ultimately provide the framework for deliberate parenting that can lead to improved outcomes. Joe and I had such a good conversation that we broke this into two parts. In part one, we'll discuss how this generation of kids is deemed by experts as the most insecure, selfish, lonely, and depressed generation that has ever existed. Further, we unpack how parents are contributing to the problem. Joe, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Joe.
For people who didn't hear the first time around, why don't you give them a little background of Youth Frontiers, how it started, how it's evolved, all that kind of stuff. Why don't we get up to speed here?
Great. Well, this is our 35th year, so we're moving into the second generation of our history. We're founded in 1987. I founded it. I needed a job, and so that's how it actually started. Mm-hmm. We've worked with over 2 million people since that date. If I wanted to define it in a clear message, we unapologetically talk about character. And character is the grounding to walk the road of life. So without character, it's going to be a very difficult path to have relationships, to build community. It's the moral underpinning of how we interact with people. Values like respect, humility, courage, kindness, responsibility. And these are the building blocks of who we are. There's the old Mother Goose story, the three little pigs. I'm not sure if that was Mother Goose or not, but if you remember the house of straw, the house of sticks, the house of bricks, and character is building a house of bricks, not of sticks or straw, because we all encounter the bad wolves, the big bad wolves in life. Rich, poor, we all have our own experience with the big bad wolves. With teenagers, which has been our core for 35 years. Now we're expanding because of the pandemic. We've had to rethink, reinvent, expand. But if you just look at teenagers, they're constantly experiencing the big bad wolves, whether it's friend struggles, bullying, parental divorce, substance abuse, academic challenges, illness, failure, loneliness, anxiety. And that's just the teenage years, So what is going to help you withstand the storms and the stresses of life is character.
How has that evolved or changed, if it has, in the last 35 years? And I think the other thought I have is, has there always been an outside need to assist in character development? If you get what I'm saying, I mean, before Youth Frontiers existed, what was the fabric of that character development, and did something change in our society?
Well, you can get into some of the philosophical underpinnings. Over the last 10, 20 years, there's been, and really you could say there's been an unraveling of stability, community, institutions, family. Some of it is the growth, the evolution of change, but some of it is the de-evolution of, could say, postmodernism, postmodern thought of everyone is an island, everyone's truth is the truth. And that has created an unstable foundation for young people to stand on. As you become an elder, you are able to process those different ways of thinking. And matter of fact, a healthy adult should be able to diversify their thoughts and see things differently. But any parent knows you need to have guardrails. You need to have a solid foundation. One of the easiest ways to create a feral child is to not have clear guidelines and groundings for a young person to develop. Mm-hmm. And our society, we are seeing that. We are seeing that with young people. They're unraveling of a sense of stability. Their mental health unraveling because they have nothing to stand on.
And is that a little bit from a parent perspective too? I've heard this old adage that you can be your kid's friend while they're growing up, and then you'll be their parent for the rest of your life. Or you can be their parent when they're growing up, and then you can be their friend for the rest of their life.
That's a great way to. I look at it as a kid has one dad. Take this in context with a culture that has challenges and differentiators with families, but they have multiple friends. So if you're a father, don't try to be their friend, because they have one of you, and they need that. I think the two things that are impacting young people today, one is culture, the society we live in, and the other is parenting. Those are probably the two greatest influencers on a young person's stability on their life. The bad news is culture is not really in our control. Now, one of our pivots at Youth Frontiers, and you were part of this, the Geometry of a Leader series with adult leaders in the nonprofit, the business, the corporate, the faith community, the education community, et cetera, et cetera. The adults, the elders, we're working now with how can we as elders reweave the fabric of our torn society with a consistent thread of language, words like how do we rehumanize our society, our nation, our neighborhoods, our community, our world. How do we rehumanize it in a dehumanized world? Values like humility, courage, respect. So those are key things with our Geometry of a Leader series, our adult work. But the bad news is we really have less impact on our culture, our broader culture, than we think. The good news is that other impact on kids is parenting. That is in our control. If we focus on not the macro but the micro, a world that we have impact on, our circle of influence, family is probably the most significant one. And that has changed significantly over the years. When I was growing up, they called it free-range parenting.
Oh, right.
And
wake up and hop on a bike, and we'll see you in 12 hours.
Yeah, the line was, come home by dark, and please be careful playing with sharp knives.
Right.
It wasn't. So that was free-range parenting.
Yeah.
It then moved to what people call helicopter parenting. And the message of that was, life can be hard, and I will pick you up when you fall, and I'll fix things when you fail. That has some debilitating effect on a young person's sense of solving problems or getting up once you fall down, okay?
Or overcoming adversity.
Right. But what is now impacting young people, and I've seen this this is a significant change from helicopter parenting, is what is called snowplow parenting or lawnmower parenting, depending on where you live in the country. Up in Minnesota, we call it snowplow parenting. Right. And the difference on this is life is scary and difficult. And I'm going to make sure as a parent that you never fall down or you never fail. Matter of fact, the concept of snowplow. I will plow the path of snow so smooth and so safe that you never slip or struggle. And what that actually does is damage a young person's ability. They become, Jonathan Haidt talks about this with his book with Greg Lukianoff, The Coddling of the American Mind. Fabulous book for anyone working with kids or as a parent. Basically, he says you actually create kids that are more fragile. Think of it as you break your bone, it becomes stronger, but you actually atrophy. And so what we're moving into, and we have created this new Parent Academy, what we call the new version of how we need to be leaning in is deliberate parenting. Different than free range, which is whatever you want to do.
Right.
Different than snowplow parenting, which is I will completely control and protect you from ever skinning your knee or purelling yourself,
Right.
If you want to think of it that way.
Right.
We build no resistance to life.
Right.
And if you look at life, M. Scott Peck in his extraordinary book, The Road Less Traveled, to me it was extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
His opening line is, life is difficult. The second sentence is, the sooner you understand that, the easier life becomes. Mm-hmm. But you could take many of the great religious traditions or philosophical traditions, the Buddhist idea of life is suffering, the Christian concept of the cross, the great seminal movie, Princess Bride, life is pain.
Right. Yeah.
But how do we prepare young people for life? And the phrase that we like to say, and I don't know who to give credit to it, but it's preparing our kids for the road, not preparing the road for kids. And there's a big difference there. And there's a lot of good work out there preparing the road. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, how do we prepare our young people and ourselves for walking the difficult path of life? Because the big bad wolf will come.
Right. Well, we're going to take a pause here. And after the break, I wanted to ask you how sports might weave into some of these concepts. Hey there, this is Joe. You know me as the host of this podcast, but did you know that I'm also the co-founder and president of Moxie Wealth Management, a boutique wealth management firm in Minneapolis, Minnesota? My team and I excel at taking complex family and business planning concepts and making our financial advice easy to understand. We recognize the trust that executives and families place in our team and value our role in helping our clients be intentional with their assets. When you partner with Moxie, my team and I focus on creating a plan that encompasses your financial goals and philanthropy, while also understanding how you want your wealth to impact your family and future generations. You can trust our unique expertise to build a thoughtful yet strategic wealth and legacy plan for your future. To learn more about me and my firm, send me an email at joe@moxiewealth.com. That's joe@moxie wealth.com. I'm a registered representative and investment advisor representative of Securian Financial Services, Inc. Securities and investment advisory services offered through Securian Financial Services, Inc., member FINRA SIPC. North Star Resource Group is independently owned and operated. Moxie Wealth Management is affiliated with North Star Resource Group. So this concept of sports and character development in children, the interesting thing I see pretty regularly, I have 3 kids, and my oldest one we just dropped off at college, but they've all played sports all the way going through. And, to be an involved dad and get those extra hours, I've coached a lot of their sports. And I've always, and this has changed dramatically to me from when I was a kid to now, I've always thought about playing sports for the life lessons that a sport could teach you versus trying to get a college scholarship, right? And so this idea of snowplowing, when you talk about it, I see it from a standpoint of parenting. So did you play sports when you were?
I was an extraordinary wrestler. Because of my size, it was the only sport I really could do at 98 pounds. Yeah. Eventually, I went up to 105.
Got it.
In college, I was 118, but that's because that was the lowest weight class.
But, what you learn from that is the people who work hard get rewarded with playing time, right? Or you're in at the end of the game because you put all the hours in the summer, all of that kind of stuff, right? And now when I coach, for example, in basketball, every parent of those 10 kids is keeping track of all the minutes that they play. And if they don't get the exact same minutes or very similar minutes to every other kid on the team, then we've got a problem. Or if it's the end of the game where you might want your more successful players out there to try to win the game, what the parents want is, my kid's never going to get a chance to hit the game-winning shot if you don't have them out there in the last 2 minutes, whether or not they've earned it. So it's a very complex deal because I feel like the life lesson is teamwork and working hard and taking direction and, all of these, that's the value, right? Because 98 or 99% of those kids won't even play in college at any level, right?
How about pro?
Yeah, right.
Go pro? Go pro!
Right. But you have the parents who are just want to make sure that they have that experience, whether or not their kids worked hard in the summer. And so I see that in sports. And also the other item is, of course, not to get too derailed on that subject, but is there's a lot of people who'll take your money too if selling the idea that if you have me personally coach your kid in whatever sport it is, we'll make sure that they have this.
That they get the medal, that they get the D1, that they get the pro contract.
Sports has turned out to be the people with money do well because of all the extra stuff that their parents are buying to snowplow, as opposed to the kids that just have talent. Other than if you're talking about basketball, I mean, probably just like the best soccer players in Brazil are the kids that are playing in the park, right? Not the ones where they can be creative and just play, right? And that's probably the best basketball players are the kids in the park where they can be creative and play. But they don't have that anymore. Anyway, so
another frame on that with athletics, and you could take this with music or theater or any type of activity that you get involved with. But sports right now is kind of the pinnacle of what we worship. Right. Think of it that way. That's one way. You just look at how we go to a pro football game. It's almost a religious experience.
Right.
But part of the danger with Little League sports and the way that we involve kids in this is what you're saying, I think, is really accurate. The other is sports, for me, really taught me how to focus on effort. It did not teach me. I loved getting the medal in wrestling or taking first or even second or third. But what it really did was it taught me about effort and about grit and about courage and about humility when I lost. And the message that I will often give when I speak to kids or athletes is winning is great. Losing teaches you more about life. And part of the danger, there's this emphasis now with, and this is because of snowplow parenting, every kid gets a gold medal at the end of the tournament. Every kid gets the medal because everyone's a winner. Well, one, that's not life. And the irony is the only people in a Little League game who don't believe that are the kids.
Are the kids, yeah.
The kids are the ones who are like, really? And in some way what it does is it twists their fabric of understanding reality. So now you fast forward a decade or two, and you're working with that 24, 25, 26-year-old employee who cannot deal with a mediocre review in their first or second year of their career from their manager. And you create a fragility in the way people walk down the path of life. And the other really damaging thing for young people, what it does is it creates a generation. We're creating a generation of anxiety-driven perfectionists that have to win at all costs, have to get the gold medal at all costs, whether it's...
Is that parenting or is that social?
Both. But I think we as parents have bought into that, and we allow it. So, when we work with bullying, the bystander versus the bully has their own internal psychological issues, but the real problem is the bystander. And too often we as parents abdicate or we buy into messages for our kids. We mean well. There are, maybe I could count on one hand the amount of parents that I've ever met that don't mean well with their kids. And there's deep pathologies in that.
But how would you, so on the, not to interrupt, but on the mean well part, when you look at the parents who are parenting the kids of the last 10 to 15 years, let's say, how have they defined or shown how they mean well? That maybe is, I mean, we've touched on it a little bit, but how it might be hurting their kids?
Well, we think it will make our kids happy. And that's part of the problem. Life doesn't, you shouldn't focus on happiness. You should focus on purpose and meaning. One of the great books, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, Nazi concentration camp survivor, started the kind of the psychological thought of logotherapy. He's a student of Jung. But what gives a person joy versus happiness is having a sense of meaning or purpose. And we are focusing on the wrong thing. I rarely have ever met a parent who says, my child has to be perfect. You don't do that. The problem is kids are great observers but poor interpreters. And so sometimes in our good intentions, but bad processes, bad ideas, the message that they understand is they need to be perfect. And Carol Dwecky's work on growth versus fixed mindset, parents who praise the outcomes, not the effort, unknowingly seed perfectionism. So when I speak with parents, and part of this is this Parent Academy I was sharing with her, is don't say to your kid, if they get the A but didn't try, don't say, I'm proud of you. You could actually say, I'm happy for you. You got the A. But I'm not proud of you. If they get the B- and tried their hardest, you say, I'm proud of your effort. You would have been happier if you got the A. I think that symbolically some kids are happy when, but just use that analogy. But it's the effort that we need to be praising. And the damage done with creating kids that are perfectionists, or the cost of perfectionism is an unhappy kid. And so we want happiness for our kids. I don't even think happiness is the goal, but we want that. And in our well-intentioned efforts, they become unhappy. And a kid who's driven by perfectionism, here are some of the outcomes of this. And we see this. They can't admit mistakes. They're unable to ever say they're sorry. And they don't try if they can't be the best in the future.
Don't take risks.
They don't take risks.
Why would I do something I don't know I can't be great at?
And then you go further on that. What is the most important thing in life? Healthy relationships, loving relationships. I know very few people that disagree with it. Even people are driven to make, bajillions of dollars or to be the star at whatever. The people that don't have healthy, loving relationships, who wants to be them? No one. But a kid that feels they need to be perfect, they're going to have a hard time having healthy, loving relationships. Why? Because relationships are not perfect. And that is so important for us as parents. And that's the danger with this emphasis on everyone getting the medal, and I need to get all, everything has to be equal on the team. And I'm not talking about third graders, but as you get older, you need to gradually move up to this is what it's going to teach you in life.
Are you familiar in academia with the reason behind what has evolved? Certainly, I don't know how long ago it was, but I see it with all my kids. The fact that when, say, a paper is due on Tuesday, it really means the paper's due sometime before the end of the quarter.
So no boundaries.
I have clients where, they went to college and they dropped out of college because when the papers were due and they weren't turned in, that was a zero. And the kids were taken aback of like, well, wait a minute. I mean, I don't understand here. Don't I have, they just aren't, because I guess college, thankfully, to me, is real life of here's your deadline.
It used to be real life.
Yeah.
We could have a whole conversation on what's going on in colleges today with some of these issues that we're talking about. And so my worry about college is it's now become an extended experience of childhood. I mean, there's some research out there that shows that a young person's brain doesn't stop developing until now they're in their 20s. And the danger in that is some of the decisions you're making and things like alcohol, chemical use, and stuff like that actually can affect your brain development. So it's more dangerous than we thought, and their decisions and stuff. But the other part of that is college should be the time where you're moving beyond, your family and starting to experience that next stage of life and making decisions and making choices and suffering the consequences of poor choices so you can adjust and pivot and do better next time. You miss that deadline and you suffer the consequence. So next time you don't miss the deadline.
Right.
But there are colleges now that have, it's basically a 4-year fun experience that is safe. You hold that whole concept of safe spaces. I understand some of the rationale for that, but again, it gets to that snowplow parenting. It's extending that. And one of the things that we, as parents, even as our kids are in middle school or high school or adolescence, is teaching them the difference between feeling unsafe with being unsafe, emotional versus physical. And I look at the way we describe it at our house. Our home with our daughter Tess is a safe base, not a safe place. And there's a little, play on the word there. In baseball, the bases are where you can pause while running the path, the road, catch your breath, lick your wounds, reflect on mistakes or choices. But then you got to run the bases or you never score.
Right.
If you just stand on second base, that's not good. You cannot spend 4 years in college standing on second base. And so then the deeper message is life is tough. Take a breath when you need it, but you're tougher than, you can run these bases.
So if you're standing, just to kind of expand that thought, standing at second base in college, how are you defining that?
I would have been mortified if my parent called my high school teacher about a grade.
Right.
In my work with colleges, I am often hearing stories of parents calling their kids' professors about grades. And now I'm hearing stories in the corporate world. I've had stories with some corporations, not even small businesses, where the parent is calling their child, and I mean child, manager to say, when you gave that review, a better way to communicate with my son or daughter is this way. And what's happening to Gen Xers and baby boomers is like, who are you? I'm sorry. And but it's becoming a reality, and you can hear these horror stories about that. So with college, it's $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year.
Right.
It's a big ticket price, and you're a consumer now. And in a consumer mindset, I have a voice in the way that my child is going to experience their college years because I'm paying a lot of money. And so I need a voice in this. And yeah, okay, let's give the devil its due on that, but there's a price that you're going to pay with atrophying your son or daughter as they move out of college. And then what happens when they're in the workplace? Well, you can't, how long are you going to continue to do that?
Right.
30?
Right.
Is your son or daughter 30 years old and you're still making their bed for them?
Right.
Oh, really?
Right. Well, and I think there's just no confidence at the end of the day in the kid to be able to deal with any problems.
How do they develop confidence when you're doing it for them? I remember when Tess was, let's say 3 years old, we went down to the park. We were in Excelsior, Minnesota, and there's a little park. And they have the old monkey bars, with you walk. It's kind of that ladder that is horizontal, and I remember Tess was kind of doing it, and she would fall, and she'd it wasn't like there weren't tacks and nails on the floor. It was sand and kind of the. But I remember at the time when I was like kind of underneath her, like, okay, you're doing it. You got through, you got it. She goes, no, Dad, I didn't do it. You did it for me. It's like. But you see these parents holding their kid and taking their hand and moving it to the next rung and the next rung, and the kid gets to the end and they're like, you did it. No, they didn't do it. You did it for them. Or, Girl Scout cookie time when kids come to your door. I love it because these little girls come to your door and they're awkward and they're uncomfortable and they're trying to sell you something that you don't really want, and you buy more boxes than you'll ever eat, and so you give them out. Well, now what's happening is parents are just emailing people, and here's a list, buy cookies from my daughter, and it's like, the point is not to make money. Yeah, the Girl Scouts makes a lot of money from it, and yeah, you get that cool pin if you sell more cookies than other people.
Right.
But that's not the point. The point of selling Girl Scout cookies is to learn to knock on someone's door and be uncomfortable in communicating with someone and trying to convince someone to buy something, and the hard work of feeling like I sold 12 boxes of cookies to this person. And however you want to look at it, the point is not to sell the cookies. The point is to teach our young people about human interaction, about business, about persuasion, about risk-taking, facing your fears. And so we're debilitating kids. And then, like I said earlier, they get older and they're unable to do that. Mm-hmm. The line I'll use is, we got to be really careful with the way we're parenting. Unless we're deliberate parents, if we stay and remain snowplow parents, the phrase that I hear is, our children might grow up to be children. And that's not a good thing.
Yeah, right. Thanks for downloading part 1 of this 2-part episode with Joe Cavanaugh, founder and CEO of Youth Frontiers. In part 2, we'll discuss his Parent Academy and the tools he gives parents to help change the narrative and lead children to more positive outcomes. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ascent podcast, a show about inspiring people who explain their path to achievement. I'm your host, Joe Burgess, wealth advisor and founding partner of Moxie Wealth Management. You can learn more about me and my firm at moxiewealthmanagement.com. That's MOXIE wealthmanagement.com. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.